Okay, thank you very much, Tim, for asking me here today. It's quite exciting for me because I actually haven't spoken about this project apart from just doing a little tour of it at a festival that the project was launched at. So you might need to bear with me, really, because it's all a bit sort of new and unwieldy and very fragmented. So I'm going to be reading some things, and then I'm also going to be just talking a bit more ad lib. So gold is a barometer for the state of the economy, a potent symbol of ultimate value, beauty, purity, greed and political power. This project, or as I call it, a depository, strives to make connections between these very different stories. It represents a personal journey through the world of gold, and the structure of the story mirrors the complexity of the task of representing the world in these fragmented and troubling times. I look at the mythologies of its discovery and the mania of the gold rush, at the brutal world of mining and at the sexual politics of the industry. I investigate how gold has become an indispensable component in the engineering and electronic industries, and how its application as a key nanomaterial now offers solutions to a range of global health and environmental challenges. The project as a whole is a response to the financial crisis of 2008 and its exposure of the Western world's determination to accumulate wealth. Like the canary taken into the mine, gold is the gauge by which we monitor our environment, the hammer, the tool that smashes the structures to which it is embedded. Gold provides a prism through which globalism can be refracted, and each topic represents a different strand, underpinned by a peculiar act of faith in its value. Ultimately, gold, mysterious, powerful and singular, is a material substance that fuses together these different versions of striving for knowledge, beauty, wealth and inordinate power. So that's just a little overview of this project, The Canary and the Hammer. It's currently in its form, it's a digital website, which I'll show you a little bit of now. So I'm just going to start by showing you one picture of a body of work that I did on Margaret Thatcher, which was a commission for 32 Smith Square. So Frederick Jameson holds postmodernism rejects traditional models of the depth. There is no expression such as in Warhol's Marilyn. The Freudian model of conscious and unconscious, or the existential model of authentic and unauthentic, is relevant to this project. The idea of the subject as a monad of individualism is a 19th and early 20th century capitalist bourgeois notion. With the rise of global economy, the notion of the sole trader, consumer and employee was made insignificant, reduced to statistical numbers. In the faceless era of corporate economy, Jameson notes how the crisis of alienation and anxiety gave way to the fragmentation of the subject, or death of the subject. He proceeds to describe the waning of effect through the process in which the subject has lost his active ability to create a sense of continuity between past and future, and to organise his temporal existence into one coherent experience. This reduces his cultural production abilities to nothing but random and eclectic piles of fragments. So I think what I'm looking at really is this project in its entirety is questioning that assumption that a pile of fragments don't actually equal a whole. And of course Jameson's ideas were very much pre-social media, so I think that his ideas are even more relevant now when we think about the postmodern online world that we are constantly inhabiting. So this project is made up of different chapters, and it starts with the disease of the heart. At the time of James I's reign, Britain was in the midst of a financial crisis. Amongst his financial reforms was granting a charter to the Virginia Company of London in 1606. The pursuit of valuable resources in the form of gold and silver that was said to be glittering on the shores within North America. James I offered the Virginia Company exclusive ownership rights to the land of Virginia, with the directive to begin mining the natural resources of the continent. The journey of 144 Englishmen to North America consisted of shareholders and investors. And on the 4th of May 1607, after over 4 months of sailing, they arrived at Chesapeake Bay and established Jamestown, becoming the first permanent English settlement of the New World. However, upon arrival, settlers would soon find the land to be largely inhospitable and barren of the resources initially desired. Early development of the town was difficult and unforgiving, fraught with famine from the inhospitable swamp terrain and conflict with the indigenous Powhatan tribe. And of course that's where historically John Rolfe, who, and not John Smith as everybody thinks, met Pocahontas and travelled back to Gravesend where she died. So one of the strands that's important to me is the connection between the virtual or imaginary space and the material, analogue, and the digital. So these images here are sun prints made of digital representations of highly detailed 3D views of the near-Earth asteroid 433 Eros. The images were not captured by a camera, but are the product of over 8 million observations from the Near Laser Rangefinder. Scientists used the data from the NLR to build detailed models of Eros's shape. NEAR team members used this information to help them understand the asteroid's evolution and internal structure. Eros was discovered in 1898, and through the data and the information that they've collated, it's thought to contain 20,000 billion kilograms of valuable minerals such as aluminium, platinum and gold. And I'm just going to come out of this now and just show you a little video.
Lawmakers have decided to expand their reach of capitalism into the universe and make celestial. U.S. lawmakers have decided to expand their reach of capitalism into the universe and make celestial bodies a source of income. President Barack Obama signed an act giving U.S. companies the right to the commercial exploration of asteroids and other bodies in space. The law states U.S. citizens are entitled to own and sell the resources they obtain. The move has thrilled some aspiring space entrepreneurs.
Planetary Resources' mission is to gain access to the natural resources of space by mining near-Earth approaching asteroids.
We're going to develop the technology and the capability to transform those resources into valuable materials.
When the first asteroid is mined.
Okay, and so it continues. So for all his wonderfulness, Obama decided that he had the right to sell asteroids, which is really, I suppose, what a lot of this project is looking at, this idea of ownership of land and territory. Okay. Okay, at the same time of documenting the historical and real aspects of the project in a traditional documentary sense of the word, I'm also continually questioning our relationship to the material, bringing us back to the methods of presentations and the connections to the histories of representation of real events, which of course what a documentary practice does. For instance, why a panoramic image? Well, beyond the practical implications, I'm also interested in the process of looking and how we read photographs. Shortly after the invention of photography in 1839, the desire to show overviews of cities and landscapes prompted photographers to create panoramics. This view in 1851 of San Francisco was made with 5 daguerreotype plates. It's believed that the panorama initially had 11 plates, but the original daguerreotype no longer exists. This image is a copy photograph submitted to the library in 1910. In a previous body of work that I completed on drones, I was very interested in Edward Steichen, who oversaw the use of the camera as a surveillance tool, mapping the topography of World War I in the trenches, and of course Alan Sekula's extensive writings on the subject. Although the perspective of the work that I'm doing is linear and not vertical, some of the elements that I'm interested in as far as my research is irrelevant. So the Dollicothy gold mines situated in Carmarthenshire, Wales, are the only documented Roman underground and surface mines in the UK. Archaeological research has dated the beginning of gold extraction within the mines during the Bronze Age, as early as 74 AD. Pure Welsh gold jewellery is incredibly rare. The wedding rings of the royal family since 1923 are made out of pure Welsh gold, the latest, of course, being that of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. So that first chapter is where this sort of very fragmented, you're getting the idea of how fragmented everything is, starts for me on that wheel of the gold depository. Each of the chapter titles are terms or sentences that are connected to relevant information as to what gold has been termed throughout history. For instance, Incas called gold sweat of the sun. So this idea of mapping that I'm really interested in brought me to Jamestown when I visited, and I thought that I would use some of the idea of mapping to document some of the area in Jamestown. Eugenie Schinkel talks about the verticality of images and our sense of scale, distorting our sense of perception and consequently our understanding of what is a real event. I don't know if anybody's seen the Richard Moss thing up in London, his presentation? No, at the Barbican? Okay, some of you are nodding. So an example of is Richard Moss, who uses this idea of virtual mapping. And I think the question for me is whether these new technologies can be theorised through existing frameworks or whether new ones have to be developed. So these are actually images of tiny fragments of the original buildings that they have in Jamestown. And what they have done and what they continue to do in America is they build fake ruins over the top of existing ruins. So not fake buildings, but fake ruins. So you go to these places and you see the ruins, but they're all fake. And everything that's real is hidden from view. So again, I'm thinking about this idea of real and imaginary within photography. Okay, I've got a whirligig, which is never a good thing. Okay, let's just go back. It's not happy. So, since the 16th century, the continent of South America has borne a troubled and changing history with gold. During the earliest colonial expeditions, Francisco Pizarro, the notorious Spanish conquistador, violently plundered Peru for its abundance of the precious metal. Today, the legacy of gold mining in Peru exists through a far different practice. So again, you can see here the external mountain in which they're actually mining the gold, and these are the internal maps that they've documented all the tunnels in which gold can be found. So Satrami is a mining organisation based within the Atacama Desert. The organisation was established in response to the falling gold price of the 1970s and the nationalisation of mining by the Peruvian government. Satrami is the largest supplier of fair trade gold in the world, with both fair trade and fair mine certificates. The Fair Trade Organisation has been significantly beneficial to the women of Santa Filomena, which this aspect of the project is mostly looking at. So Satrami employs 300 miners, a group of engineers and a group of 180 women who are known as palaqueras or mineral sorters. They sort the ore on the surface of the mines for pieces containing gold with a small tool called a manitou. I'm just going to show you just a few portraits. And this is not one of the palaqueras, as you can probably tell. This is Edward Curtis. This is a self-portrait of Edward Curtis. And he was a very well-known photographer who made something called a gold orotone. His work focused on the American West, and in 1906 he was commissioned by J.P. Morgan to document Native Americans. It took him 20 years and he produced over 1,500 photographs. So for this aspect of the project, the material presentation of this work, the exhibition presentation of this work, will include gold orotones. And a gold orotone is the use of gold leaf, and in this case I've used gold leaf from Satrami, that's put onto the back of a piece of diaphanous paper that has the original print on. In Curtis's time, this was obviously a glass frame, so I'm using sort of new materials. I think they used banana gum on the back of the glass plates, but I'm using a specific sort of fixer. So I just thought I'd show you some of these experimentations that I've been doing. So alongside the more formal aspects within this project, I've been doing still lives. This is a rock with fool's gold that also contains real gold, photographed with fluorescent light. One of the myths surrounding the properties of gold is its ability to fluoresce. While a small number of minerals do indeed visibly fluoresce under ultraviolet light, gold is not one of them. These are the minerals that contain some of the gold. And this is the hammer, which is where the title comes from. But it's very much informed by Heidegger's idea of the tool and this, ready-to-hand idea of the hammer and the present-at-hand idea of the hammer. I'm assuming you all know about Heidegger's relationship to the tool, but it was really interesting for me looking at these women using these tools because the tool becomes just an extension of their arm. It's just like a claw that basically they strap on and they just dig away. I haven't got a picture of them. So I was quite interested in this idea of the extension and what happens when that tool breaks, and that sort of disappearance of the extension of the body, I suppose. So it was very informed by Heidegger's ideas. So as well as thinking about all of these things whilst I'm working, I'm also documenting directly the process of actually what it means to make gold. Of course they use cyanide, and they use something called a carbon and leach method, which is a gold extraction technique. And what happens is the gold is attached to charcoal and then it's burnt. I'm not going to go into it because it's a very lengthy process. But needless to say, there is, even though this is a fair trade mine, there are still problems with lakes of poisonous cyanide that are in the mountains, and they're all contained in these big plastic troughs. I'm just showing you some photos of some of the tools, really, the tools of the trade. Okay, and I'm just going to go out of the project if I can, or maybe I'll wait to the end actually, because I want to show you the representation of that project actually on the website and how it looks, because it's quite different from just showing slides to actually the digital presentation of the work. Tim, how am I doing for time? Have you?
15 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay. So the next chapter is called The Ghost of Gold, and it's informed by I suppose this idea of invisible gold and the relationship between gold and capitalism. Now, it doesn't look like that's going to play. So alongside this website presentation, I've got an actor to speak, who's an actor at the Globe called Jimmy Garner, who speaks the Percy Shelley poem called The Mask of Anarchy, which I'm sure some of you know. But anyway, he talks about this idea. It was a poem that was made following the Peterloo massacre in Manchester, where 60,000 people gathered to demand parliamentary reform at a time of real sort of political unrest. And it's, I suppose, a call for freedom and non-violent resistance. So this goes alongside, the poem actually goes alongside this particular chapter, which is all based around the banking industry in America and, I don't know why it's, there we go. So again, it's this idea of actually not being able to see the thing that I'm talking about, this idea of the invisibility. So the gold in the vaults beneath the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is the largest gold repository in the world, the vast majority of which belongs to foreign governments or international organisations and other central banks. In recent years, many international governments, such as the Deutsche Bundesbank, have requested to repatriate their deposits. The 674 tonnes of gold bars on the request of the Federal Reserve have been scheduled to be removed gradually, increasing speculation as to how much the gold the Reserve actually holds. So this wireframe landscape depicts the gold price from 1257 to 2016. And it was informed by, I suppose, that idea of the asteroid, but it's been made showing the peaks and troughs of gold in relationship to global events. So you can see there. And I am going to come out of that and I'm going to show you something.
Your true wealth is your time and freedom. Money is just a tool for trading your time. It's a container to store your economic energy until you're ready to deploy it. But the whole world has been turned away from real money and has been fooled into using currency. A deceitful impostor that is silently stealing your two most valuable assets, your time and your freedom. Welcome to the rabbit hole.
We are entering a period of financial crisis that is the greatest the world has ever known. The wealth transfer that will take place during this decade is the greatest wealth transfer in history. Wealth is never destroyed, it is merely transferred, and that means that on the opposite side of every crisis there is an opportunity. The great news is that all you have to do to turn this crisis into your great opportunity is to educate yourself. I believe that the best investment that you can make in your lifetime is your own education. Education on the history of money, education on finance, education on how the global economy works, education on how all of these guys, the central bankers, the stock market, how they can cheat you, how they can scam you. If you learn what is going on and how the financial world works, you can put yourself on the correct side of this wealth transfer. Winston Churchill once said that the further you look into the past, the further that you can see into the future. This program is all about creating your own crystal ball, being able to gaze into the future, being able to change this crisis, the greatest crisis in the history of mankind, into your great opportunity.
الناس حب الشهوات من النساء والبنين والقناطير المقنطرة من الذهب والفضة والخيل المسومة والأنعام والحرث ذلك متاع الحياة الدنيا والله عنده حسن المآب.
Just as Allah made the new moons a measurement of time in His saying,
يسألونك عن الأهلة قل هي مواقيت للناس والحج.
He Azza wa Jal decreed for gold and silver to be the standard mediums to measure all goods and services against, and created them with the ideal properties to function as such. Gold and silver are divisible as they can be divided into pieces. They can also be melted into jewelry, they don't corrode, and they don't have a shelf life. This means that their store of value would endure. And since everyone desired them, and there were only a finite amount in existence, you can't grow it of course, a small amount of gold came to possess a very high store of value.
Okay, so that's an ISIS propaganda video that was copied by this guy who sells gold online called Mike Maloney. And what was really interesting for me about this idea was that ISIS in their caliphate, which of course no longer exists or is in the process of no longer existing, produced something called a gold dinar, which they said basically they're going to get rid of all all American dollars and use gold currency. But of course the gold dinar didn't actually exist. I had people on the ground in Iraq looking for it and it didn't actually exist. So I was really interested in this idea of using an online resource that already exists to create something that's propaganda, and also this development in the political ideology of ISIS is that the caliphate is going to now exist online rather than in material in the land. Let's see if I can not crash this program. God, they don't like it, do they, PowerPoints, when you scroll through them. Just talk amongst yourselves for a bit. I've got the rainbow of death now. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, so this is another title. The other, an additional chapter that I made took me to NASA, where I discovered this really interesting telescope that was invented by George Robert Carruthers. It's called a spectrograph, and it comprises of a telescope and a camera designed to capture images within the UV region of the electromagnetic spectrum. And it's a gold-plated camera. For those of you that don't know, NASA uses the highest quantity of gold of any organisation in the world within its technology. So this gold-plated camera is actually still on the moon. It exists up there. They left it up there, and there's a copy of it down in Maryland. And it's basically was pre-Hubble, so it was designed to sort of capture studies of solar wind and gas clouds and things like that. So throughout my time working in both Houston and in Maryland, I just was documenting the use of gold. So it's used as a thin coating which reduces glare and heat from the sunlight on the visor. There's also a huge amount of gold in the space shuttle, and I think probably what was really interesting for me is that they're currently building this thing called the James Webb Telescope, which is replacing the Hubble, and it consists of 18 large hexagonal mirrors, the surface of which is all gold, and it's utilised because it's the only material that doesn't corrode, has extraordinary reflective qualities. Okay, the fox and the rooster. So the world's largest producer of e-waste, as probably everybody knows, is the United States, with an estimated 7 million tonnes produced annually. Instead of recycling their e-waste, which can be costly and time-consuming, much of the waste from the USA is exported and dumped into developing areas across Asia and China and Africa. Since December 2015, the majority of the 5,000 waste workshops within the infamous town of Guiyou in the Guangdong province in China have been recycling gold. This has now been dispersed and the workshops are now disseminated through southern China. But this recycling is directly responsible for the increase in the ownership of gold from the Chinese, which is now second in the world. So electronic waste, or e-waste, is rapidly becoming the fastest growing source of waste of gold in the world. Gold within e-waste exists in the circuitry of many household electronics, such as computer equipment, televisions, screens, etc. It's highly toxic and often containing substances such as lead, mercury and cadmium. And I was really, I suppose, in how I was photographing those in China, they have these fascinating caves and they light them, whereas we will show things, you know, in as they are with lovely stalactites. They actually just create these wonderful displays using bright colours. So I was very interested in using that as a tool to photograph. So Hong Kong obviously serves as one of the major ports for entry of e-waste into China. Trucks or ships of containers are transported and they're labelled illegally as raw plastics to comply with customs, and then they're smuggled over the border. So I was working with this workshop in southern China, in Shenzhen, and they were crushing the e-waste and making gold, and it's pretty much the same process as they use in Peru, using high quantities of cyanide. And then the gold, once it's been made, goes back into the Hong Kong, and it serves as one of the major major places of which jewellery production happens. And they also make things such as these, which are gold grills. These were actually made by this very famous rapper called Johnny Dang, and these ones here were made for the Rio Olympics, and he offered every single person that won a gold medal a gold grill, so they could go up and accept that. You might have seen them. And I think what was really interesting for me is that this idea that, you know, gold production happens over there, it doesn't happen in this country, but a huge amount of it happens over here. And Birmingham, as some of you may or may not know, is synonymous with the jewellery industry since the middle of the 16th century, and it actually has 40% of the UK market. And just outside Birmingham is a place called Betts, where they actually recycle using exactly the same chemicals as they do in China, the aqua regia process. So this is a photograph of gold before it's been heated. This is taken in Derbyshire, and this is in China, and you can see the similarities are pretty much exactly the same. So this was quite surprising for me. I didn't realise that gold production actually happens here in the UK, and it pretty much looked exactly the same as the workshop in China as well.
At least 2 minutes.
Thank you, I've nearly finished. Okay, and just to finish off with, I'm just going to show you the last chapter, which is the use of the production of gold nanoparticles in medicine. And gold nanoparticles, for some of you that might know, are used within cancer treatments, within all sorts of different sort of medical uses. It's a really good, because it attracts drugs, it's really good at taking drugs directly to tumours. So I was working directly with this organisation in Cardiff that actually make gold nanoparticles. Malaria drugs. And this is what a gold nanoparticle looks like when it fluoresces. And there's a woman in China that I was working with who was developing this looking at different types of gold nanoparticle rods to see how much they fluoresce. And one of the things that's happening at York University, which is really interesting, is they're using plants to abstract gold nanoparticles from waste sites where where mining has taken place, as a way to then the local population can grow these plants. They then can burn these plants to produce gold catalysts using different plants, and then they can sell those on. So it's a different way of gaining some money other than the direct way of using mining. And just to show you what it looks like in its current form as a presentation, it's a 3-screen interactive sort of cube where everything moves and shifts around you. Have I got time just to show 3 minutes of the website? Okay, so it's a scrolling website. It utilises audio, film and video, and there's a narrator.
Sutrami is a mining organisation based within the Atacama Desert of central Peru. Founded in 1989, the organisation was established in response to the falling price of gold in the 1970s and the nationalisation of mining by the Peruvian government, becoming the first artisanal and small-scale mining company of the country. Sutrami employs 300 miners, a group of engineers, and a group of 180 women known locally as the palaqueras, or mineral sorters, who sort the ore on the surface for pieces containing gold with a tool called
So it's basically, the website is a sort of a format that sort of collates some of my research and interests, as well as the documentation of some of these real events. Okay, that's me done.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. I thought half an hour was quick.
Well, you covered a lot there. So the format of these presentations is there's half an hour presentation and then roughly 15 minutes for discussion. And please, does anybody have any questions, observations? Sam?
I was lucky enough to be at Format, so I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the way that it was viewed there, because actually as an exhibition, the website is an amazing immersive experience, and almost the website doesn't go far enough to kind of present the information. There was something really nice about it being a shared digital experience. It wasn't solitary, and the website puts it back in the kind of singular. So I wonder if you could expand on those ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that within the world of documentary, as you probably know, there's, you know, people like the New York Times, and they're using increasingly the digital space to tell stories. And I was quite interested using that format, but in the relationship, I suppose, slightly more to the gallery. Because the thing about the New York Times presentation of a documentary story is it's quite dry, it's quite dense. Once you're in, it's like, okay, here's more information, da da da. So I wanted to create something that was a bit more like an independent gallery experience, but an online form of it. So what you saw at Format was just one aspect of it. How it's meant to work is that it's meant to be a cube. and you're meant to have an immersive experience that is shared with everybody else. But on the outside, you have some of the more material aspects that I was showing and talking about at the beginning. So you have this relationship between the outside and the inside, the material and the digital, but it's a physical, experiential response to it. So, you know, the website does something different. It enables you to actually spend, if you want to, and you can be bothered, most people don't, but, you know, an hour and a half, there's all my research at the back with links. So it's a different way of, they're two different things, really, I suppose.
Is there a connection between the subject matter and the experience that you've created, the exhibition experience?
Well, I was quite interested. Did you hear me talk about it there? Okay, so I was quite interested in sort of James Moore and the capitalist scene. I haven't really talked about it here, but this idea of you know, the ubiquitous nature of photographs in relationship to capital and nature. And I think that sort of the physical moving about of people in a space looking at something seemed to somehow be an interesting relationship. It's something that actually that you talked about, the whole idea of the body interacting with the digital and the immersive. And then, of course, there's that connection with gold being completely ubiquitous and it being hidden and invisible, and it can be seen, absolutely, it can't be seen and it can be seen. I was sort of thinking about that in terms of digital frameworks and imagery as well, is that, you know, we almost don't see imagery anymore, and I like this connection between how the online representation for me mirrors how we view gold, really, and how little we actually know about it, but we know that it exists and we accept that it's part of our lives in the same way that we're looking at digital imagery. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thanks very much. That's really interesting. It's perhaps an observation that I would be very interested to hear your comments on it. I just see sort of a kind of two very different kind of trajectories. There's a sort of a cyclical, really interesting cyclical thing going on between the materiality of the gold and then the representation and the way that feeds back into how we understand it. So there's this really interesting kind of connection imagined between the real and the imaginary, perhaps. But there's also, what I also find very interesting in your work is the kind of commitment to fragmentation and to finding paths which are neither linear nor they don't seem to have a shape. And I just wondered how if that had any resonance with you in a sense.
Oh God, completely. I mean, I've been desperate my whole career to create something that was solely fragmented, because it's how I work, it's how I think, it's how the thing about photography is that when I studied, you were forced to create series of works, and they all looked the same, and there was a beginning, there was a middle and an end, and you were told something and you consumed it, and it was truth, and that was it, and that's how you deal with photography, and it's still like that. But because of, you know, what has been happening, I don't want to use the word post-truth, but because of what has been happening, you know, that has impacted in photography, and photographers are now working much more in a fragmented way with individual images and putting them together. But the thing that's not happening is that nobody's contextualizing that. So they're just using it as a stylistic form, but they're not actually connecting it to the work that they're making. Which is what I'm trying to do and what I'm really interested in, which is why obviously Jameson's such a big influence on me, because I think it's you know, and people like Adam Curtis, you know, Adam Curtis is another great example. He puts like endless, you know, he pick and mixes sort of narratives, and then he puts them all together, and he attempts at making a very subjective linear view of the world, but actually it's completely fragmented. But what I've tried to do is to take that further and to keep it fragmented, so that, you know, you enter the site in a circular way, you can choose exactly where you want to go, and you can sort of make your own connections, you know, as much as you like. So, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just not very good perhaps at articulating it. Don't know.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I really like the project, and I really like the documentation of it, and I just wanted to ask you, because, like Brian, I really like the way that there are these different paths and there are these different parts of the work and they're connected, but it's not a kind of forced narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have already in mind when you started how you would present it, or how did you come to this, the format that you presented it in?
I always wanted to do a website. I was funded. The work was funded by Getty Images, and which was full of irony for me because I absolutely hate Getty. So I really wanted to do something anti-aesthetic that they couldn't use, and they haven't been able to use it because they don't know what to do with it. So it's been brilliant as far as that is concerned. And I was and I am going to be producing a book of it. And the book form is much more instinctively about, you can create fragments within a book quite easily. So I think that the work was sort of a bit more inspired by, when I first started making it, I was thinking about the book, but also to work alongside the website. So, for instance, the book will include like an orotone. It'll be an extremely sort of precious thing. The other thing that was really important for me was that the work got out there, because the thing about the photography world, a bit like the art world, is that we actually all end up making work for each other, and that's about as far as it goes. And I was very excited yesterday because the World Gold Council tweeted my website, and I thought, yes, at last. So photography books are an absolute example of, people just within the circle buy the book, and I wanted something that could get out there that was free to view. So yeah, I was always going to do that with it.
Any other questions? I've got a question. I'm not sure if I heard what you said correctly, but did you pair the idea of an imaginary world with digital media? Like the imagination is digital media? At the beginning of your talk.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the
material analog you were discussing. That.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the digital world is that it's an imaginary world. It doesn't exist in real life at all. So yeah, I'm.
It's the virtual part of it.
The virtual part of it.
Nature, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's very interesting. In a peculiar way, the website reminded me of CD-ROMs, which pre-existed the internet. But it's a really interesting example of what's replaced CD-ROMs, which is web-based interactivity of that kind.
Yeah.
I think the non-linear and also the vertical and horizontal works well too.
I mean, the realities is that most people will look at it, but they will only spend 5-10 minutes of it. Yeah. That's how websites work. So, it's about having a 2 or 3 pronged attack, isn't it, on projects?
Yeah.
Mm.
Good.
Okay.
Any other observations, questions? Well, thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks.